Okay, we'll come back to order. It's Finance Committee meeting. It's at 12:30. And approval of the agenda. Go ahead.
Resolved that the agenda for the September 9th, 2025 Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented.
Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Cookett, Councillor Hentz. All in favor? Oh, yep, all in favor. Yeah, sorry. Carried. And next, we have adoption of the minutes.
Resolved that the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held on February 11th, 2025 be adopted.
Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Sloan, Councillor Latham. All in favor? Motion carries. Any declaration of pecuniary interest? Don't imagine so. Down to Chief Administrative Officer's business plan and budget process, schedule and engagement process. Blaine, floor is yours.
Thank you, Warden Jones. Through you to members of committee. The report before you is a summary of a number of things. A couple of the objectives that we wanted to address in the report is the approach that I'd like to see us take this year, the format of things, the schedule that we'd like to follow, as well as some comments on community engagement. So as members of committee are aware, we've been discussing, and it's come up in a couple of instances where we're trying to shift the schedule of both the business planning process as well as our year-end process. So you'll note this year, the year-end is a little bit earlier in the year than what it was in the past couple of years. The business planning, again, will start and will end a little earlier than what it has been. Ultimately, what we're moving to is to get final approval of the business plan and budget prior to year end for the next year, and completion of our year end and discussion with council in that May-June timeframe prior to sort of mid-year. So over the next year or two, that schedule will continue to move and shift a little more forward. So with respect to this report, again, the approach that I'm recommending here, and I'll preface some of my comments with saying there's terms and terminology that I've used in this process and in the report that I've used in many years leading up to now in my previous life. This is a process that I built a few years ago. So the terminology might be new, so I'll try to explain things as we go forward. And certainly we can tweak some of that. That's something that Ms. Ford and I are working on, is that common terminology so that all of us internally are on the same page and no one's thinking that the new guy is completely lost it. But so the approach that I'd like to take this year is designed to provide a clearer alignment and a clearer direction between council's strategic direction for the community and the organization, the objectives, meaning the projects that are initiatives or things that are necessary to advance that strategic plan, and then the resources required to achieve those objectives. So keeping that in alignment, that's the sort of the heart of the approach that is outlined in here. So in doing that, each department will be looking at preparing what I've called before as a performance plan. What that identifies is essentially the services that each department provides, some of their highlights from what they've done in the previous year, or in this case, the current year that we're talking about. And then some of their larger initiatives, projects, objectives for the following year, the actual budget planning year, and how they connect and advance council's strategic direction and the plan that's been set by council. A summary of the budget that's required to do that, and then any other resourcing. So human resources, financial resources, essentially, again, tying that alignment between strategic direction, the objectives required to advance that in that direction, and the resources required. So that, again, is sort of the heart and soul of it. Those performance plans will become what each department will rely upon as they build their actual budget And again, just for councilors or committees' benefit, the way I look at a budget is essentially just a financial documentation of the plan. I don't like to see a budget prepared without a plan to actually advise council and the community what are we trying to accomplish, why are we trying to accomplish, and then what do we need to accomplish. It is the last discussion. So the budget is sort of the last part of that planning process. So what that will ultimately come to be as far as before the Finance Committee within the next couple of months is each department will be talking about their performance plan, essentially laying out for committee what they're going to accomplish, how it ties to the strategic direction, and the resources required. That essentially outlines two things in your performance plan. Something that I've called a base budget, which a base budget in my mind is what you need to keep the organization going, or in this case, each department moving forward at the same level of service that's been set by the previous year. So no large initiatives, no large projects, nothing like that. It's just what you need to just continue to keep doing the same level of service. It also identifies what I've called in the past as service level enhancement forms or service level change forms. They've gone under a little bit of a revision through the years, but essentially what that provides to council and the community is additions or reductions in levels of service and the impacts as a result of that. So again, and we'll take an example of a project that we're undertaking this year that was captured in our plan for 2025 was the economic development strategy development. So that was set at a budget. Again, those service level change forms are usually, they have a materiality limit to them. I think Ms. Ford and I have talked around the $15,000 mark. So anything above that would require one of those forms. So using the example that I'm using, the economic development strategy, council would have seen in the economic development base budget, that project not included. They would have been provided, or in this year, if that project was coming forward, they would have been provided a one-page business case as to what that project is, why it should be moving forward, the justification for it moving forward, and the resourcing it takes to deliver it, whether it be additional funds for consultants or anything like that, so that council can see sort of in a one-page snapshot the reason why we're recommending that project move forward. If council says, yes, we agree with that, then it's included in the budget or in the plan for next year as well as the budget. So those are the essential elements, yes, of each department's performance plan or their business plan for the following year is what that base budget is, and then recommendations to add to that for advancing the strategic priorities. In most cases, they will be tied to the strategic priorities. In all cases, any type of additional human resources would require one of those plans so that council can see exactly why we're recommending the additional of any staffing positions. So in any case, if there's an additional staffing member being or a position being recommended, that would be captured on one of those business cases so that council is clearly identified why and the justification behind it. The schedule that we'd like to address now, we've identified a couple of days where we'll talk about the business plan and the operating budget, i.e. the base budget. The second full day that we're identifying is a capital expenditure plan, which again, each capital project will have a one-page business case justifying why we believe that project should move forward and the costing of that project and how the project will be funded. So then in some cases, so that council can again fully understand the implications of that, and some of this was discussed at our earlier council meeting, is that sometimes when there's a capital investment, there's an ongoing operating expense. We want to be able to capture that for council's understanding so that when the capital expenditure is considered, that there's as good as understanding as we have at this point in time communicated to council as far as what the potential operating impact and that operating impact could be a reduction in costs as well. Sometimes, as council members would be aware, when one of the justifications that we use to drive a capital investment recommendation is the fact that our maintenance or our operating expenditures are going too high. So if we invest capital, it'll actually reduce our operating expenditures. Those will capture those as well. So what we're proposing is those 2 full days. I'm not saying that we'll require those 2 full days, but we'd like to actually block those off now so that council members are aware of sort of what the timing was moving forward. I recall that this was a point of discussion at last year's process, is that if we can identify those dates a little more in advance, that because obviously this becomes a busy time of year for your own councils with respect to business planning and budgeting and whatnot. So as we get near the end of the year, so we wanted to try to identify a couple of dates that would work into the larger process itself. So those are the dates that we've included. Those presentations that you'll see those days are essentially each department head presenting their performance plan. What they're really driven or intended to do is to ignite more discussion between council and our staff with respect to how do we advance the plan and what does it take to do it. Right. And so we bring obviously a level of expertise to the table. You bring a level of expertise to the table. So really the intention of those presentations is a discussion as to how we can collectively advance the plan that council set for the community and the organization. I'd like to see us move away from, I'll use the term, just large, cumbersome spreadsheets full of, numbers upon numbers, and talk more about what the plan is, and then talk about the resourcing to advance the plan. The last element being the public engagement that we're recommending. My understanding is the county's engaged in a couple of different community engagement approaches in the past number of years. One that I found works fairly well is if we allow for some engagement for a period of time, we'll pick a couple of weeks for an online type of approach that people can provide their comments or questions. I wouldn't suggest a lengthy type of survey. Perhaps a few pointed questions generally gets to the heart of the matter. And then have a public engagement meeting in an evening where people, if they do choose to come and actually speak to council, then they have that opportunity. At that meeting, we also present to council the cumulative comments that we've received in the period leading up to that. I found that over the years, all the approaches that have been taken, and I think we've pretty much run, or at least I've been a part of pretty much every type of approach you can take. This one works the best. It provides sort of different opportunities across the course of a couple of weeks and in a couple of different formats. It generally has, I found it to work fairly well. Where this schedule that we're presenting today, where it ends up is our approval in roughly about in the middle of January, which is a regular council meeting. This is I'm not going to say aggressive, but it is fairly intense that we move things along quickly. A lot of that obviously lies on our staff to continue to move things forward. But this is the schedule that we're proposing. So with that, Warden Jones, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. The executive team here as well. This has been a collaborative effort. We sat it's the last week between Ms. Ford and Mr. Duchek and myself, obviously, Peter being involved because of the large impact of capital that his area carries. So we sat with Ms. Thompson and myself the last week for a couple of hours and went through what we thought would be a sound approach. They're still getting a little bit used to the new guys' approach to these things, but as I've said, this approach is something that I built a number of years ago, and it's worked well for me. So I'll recommend that, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions, Warden.
Thank you, Blaine. You want to do the resolution first?
Resolved that the Finance Committee approve the business plan and budget process, schedule, and engagement process as contained in the September 9th, 2025 report titled Approval of 2026 Business Plan and Budget Process, Schedule, and Engagement Process.
Mover and seconder, please. Pardon me. Counselor Cookett, seconder, Counselor Hentz. Open the floor up for questions or comments. Counselor Cookett, go ahead.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Warden. First of all, I really appreciate having the budget process laid out this way, and especially developing a budget by the beginning of the next year. In my former life, I was in charge of dealing with a budget, a small one compared to this one here. $5 million was kind of the budget I looked at. And one of the items that one of the parts of the process that was kind of difficult was base budgeting, in the sense that each department began their budget with what happened last year. And what that did was increase the inflationary nature of the budget of each department. So you begin with what you had last year, and we always add something to it. There was nothing in that particular process that asked for a review of what happened last year that could be changed this year. And so I asked kind of for that. And we eventually ended up with what it's not a new term, but what we call zero-based budgeting, in which you begin each year on the basis of you've got no money, so tell us what you need to do what you need to do, period. So I guess my question is, have you thought of the zero-based budget, and what are the kinds of pitfalls or problems that you would see in that kind of approach?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Warden. Thank you for the question, Councillor Cookett. Municipalities have historically encountered some challenges, as you described, with respect to previous years leading into following years. With respect to the concept of zero-based budgeting, I believe that it's effective in some aspects, not in all aspects, but I believe it's effective in some. The way that the financial side of the resourcing should be developed, as far as in my mind anyways, and what I've done in the past, is part of the reason why this schedule is set the way it is, and my apologies for not touching upon this, is that with our new, and still being developed and still evolving, but with our new quarterly reporting with respect to financial actuals, this process largely hangs off of the third quarter report that council will see early November, but I will see later October, that will inform a lot of the financial requirements for the following year. So when our department heads receive their third quarter actuals, they will be forecasting, again, we're revising their forecast for a year end. That should largely drive at least some of the discussion that's required as far as what's required for next year, because we now have the ability to track actually over the last couple of years, but particularly with respect to the current year, what our actuals are. With respect to zero-based budgeting, the elements that I think where value comes from that, taking that approach, is things like, I'll use an example of staff development. When we have staff development, that should be tied to what our plan is for our individual employees with respect to, keeping them up to date with legislative changes, advancing their careers, things like that. That shouldn't just be a bucket that continues to increase every year, but our department heads, one of the responsibilities they have is continuing to work with their staff and build their staff's knowledge of, as I said, changing legislation or changing advancements in technology or things like that. So in my mind, that's one area that you do start with zero and you build on what exactly is the plan for your employees for the following year. So I think it's a combination in my mind between zero basing in some areas and using the knowledge that you have from the current year and previous years with respect to the actual expenditures and actual revenues to drive what the next year should look like.
Counselor Sloan, go ahead.
Sorry, would you like to go ahead? Okay, thanks, Counselor. Thanks very much. And I am one who appreciates that there won't be you had a specific term about a lot of data being given. And it's also good news. I know we have an HR person, Holly, that the committee was very pleased to have join the team. Would it be fair in the process, a couple of questions through the warden? One, you talked about clarity, and all I'm asking for is it to be a little clearer in certain elements so that we're comparing like items. Last year, when we added 5 or 6 people to the roster of full-time employees, this year you're saying that there's going to be some information on that. Is there any way that we could get an update on the people that were hired last year, as in what their job descriptions might be and how they've contributed?
Through you, Warden, I don't see an issue with that, Councillor Sloan. We can certainly provide. One of the things that I'm accustomed to seeing in a business plan is an overall, what I've referred to before as an FTE schedule. So the number of, FTEs in each department. There is, and again, tied into the quarterly reporting with respect to our management of our employees, council should be aware moving forward anyways with the number of vacancies we're managing, things like that. So, but with respect to, perhaps that's something that we can take away and include in the performance plan that, through, almost in the highlights of the current year, if there were additional people added, the benefit that they've brought to the organization. We can absolutely do that.
And thank you, through you, Warden, to Councillor Cookett's comment that, we have extra people, and then there's, what's the zero base of what we had before and what we're achieving today with those extra pieces. That's the piece that I'd like, and I thank you for that. And just a quick follow-up. I'd like to be able to, I think sometimes when in the heat of the moment, there's questions. I asked Mr. Foster today a question, and he said, "Oh, come and chat with me," because quite frankly, some of this is, we don't necessarily want to put our hand up and be videotaped saying, "I really don't know what this means." I'd like to be able to put forward some questions in advance of any meeting so that I could say, maybe it's just me, but I have a question about X, Y, and Z. When we've done in the past, we've shown when it comes to capital expenditure plans, obviously you've got your mix of municipalities and this versus that and what's, most relevant. I find that very interesting. And I think that that's where this council shows its ability, as you've mentioned, because they know their tiers, or they know their municipalities as well as anyone. At the end of the day, for me, the opportunity, though, that I would like to be able to do is either with you and Ms. Ford to say, let's have a meeting and here's some things I'd like to bring forward as we work to, things like I'm told about the cost of funding our amortization. They tell me that the lower tier that we can't afford to do that, right? How do I understand what that means and going forward? And secondly, just with no disrespect, we talk about things like, and I'm going to use it to a housing analogy. Like if we look at Terrace Lodge, which everyone appreciates the good work that's been done, that is it like, we talk in many times about, well, we're going to need that. We're going to need that money for X, Y, and Z for this long-term project. For me, as like a home reference, okay, if I own Terrace Lodge, I've got X money from the bank, I'm going to have to pay the following for the next number of years. I'd like to better understand that so that we know, what, when the budget item comes, this amount will be going to Terrace Lodge, and we have that all laid out. Not for operating, and I know that changes and fluctuates, but for the contribution to how it's paid for. I'm a guy that, looks at his mortgage and says, I've got 12 years left or whatever. And I just would like to better understand the different categories, if that makes any sense. Thank you, Warden.
Through you, Warden, a couple of things there, Councillor Sloan. So thank you for jogging my memory on a couple of things. What I've done in the past, and it's worked extremely well with respect to questions from council members, is I identify one point on our employee, so whether it be Catherine or Stephanie or all questions go into that person. They're tracked on a spreadsheet. The question is forwarded to the appropriate staff person to provide a response back to that staff person. And then once a week or once every few days, that spreadsheet is circulated to all council members so that they can see the questions that are coming in, because you could think of something that Councillor Widner thinks of something different. We'd like to track those questions so that A, we can see, are we missing the mark on something? because if there's similar questions coming in. And then the other reason I've done that in the past is so that all council members are getting, all the information that's going out. So we can then, the time that we have together in meetings, we can then focus our discussion and our consideration on, some of the bigger items. So we can certainly take that approach. It's worked well for me in the past with respect to just tracking those questions and then circulating the information, as I said, once a week or every few days. It goes out to all council members so that, everyone's aware of the same level of information. With respect to the comments you made about amortization and things like that, we're still in a point where the pieces of the puzzle are still coming together, and I'll use that analogy. So a reference in the report that Mr. Duchek will be speaking with council in a few weeks about our last phase of our asset management planning, which is determining the level of service that you'd like those assets to perform at. That drives a lot of the costing discussion that will need to be had, because if you want our roads to function at a higher level of service, obviously costs and services and service levels drives those costs. If you want any asset category performing at a higher level, chances are there's an associated cost with that. That whole concept and that whole plan feeds into what I've identified in the past with my discussions with council, which I think is lacking here. Once we free up some of Mrs. Ford's time through Questica and other things, which will be next year, one of the recommendations that I will be making to council in this business plan is we turn our minds to a long-range financial plan. I think it's a very valuable tool that we are missing right now with respect to one of the major pieces of the puzzle, how everything we own, the level of service you wanted to operate, the funding requirements to make them operate at that level and replace them ultimately is all captured in the repository of a long-range financial plan. What I've done in the past is where our financial discussions would begin with respect to the business planning is understanding what that long-range financial position is of the county when we factor in all previous decisions that have been made with respect to, capital expenditures, operating levels of service, and things like that. I think that would help you address and understand more of the bigger picture as to where things fit. And, when you talk about, if you own a house, you have a mortgage, you have things you have to replace on a constant basis, you have just general daily maintenance you do, all of that is captured in that long-range financial plan. The county's operations obviously much more complex than what, each of us individually face owning a home, but so it needs a more complex tool to capture all that information and convey it to council for what I would call is much more informed decision-making. I hope I've answered some of your questions, but.
Counselor Zagarich, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So four notes I have. One thing I didn't see here was the date by which the committee would receive information. And I know there's a minimum amount of time, and usually by Thursday on the Tuesday. And I'm wondering, based on what we will be reviewing, if that date could be earlier. And if so, what that date could be. It would be nice to capture this in the plan.
Thank you, Councillor Zagarich. I would normally like to see this level of information in council's hands about a week ahead of when the actual meeting would be.
So this segues to my second point. Because when I see the word that departments will present, and I cringe a little bit, because what I would like to see is if all of us committee members invest their time to come here physically and be around the horseshoe, it would be to have discussions. So I would like, I don't need to sit here to receive a presentation that walks for 30 minutes, that walks me through description of services, accomplishments, action items, KPIs. I want to receive that 1 week ahead of time. I think it should be clear enough even for the public to stand alone. And then perhaps the presentation is about 5 minutes, really for us to hear, so what is the impact on service levels, for example, and what you're describing? Where do you want council's input? Where have you found or looked for efficiencies as one of our strategic priorities? And then really immediately, as we're sitting here as a committee, allow us to jump in. As you said, you want this process to really be about discussions. So I know in the past, and this, I hope that this is not to minimize the importance of that information at all. It's just, it needs to be presented clearly on its own. And we should all be able to commit to reading that on our own. Sending questions in advance, I really, really would appreciate that. And then just, like I said, a little 5-minute introductions with key points that you want, where staff are looking for the committee's input, and then we jump right in the discussion. Would that be your interpretation of what you mean by when departments will present?
Through you, Warden, certainly open to that approach. I think if I told the executive team that they don't have to have an elaborate presentation to council, I might be their best friend for a while. So we can certainly take that approach. What I've done in the past is to have just a couple of minute overview by each department head of their performance plan. Certainly no more than, in that 5 to 10 range, but if we want to try to keep it at the 5 mark, then perfect. Of just here's a high level overview of my plan. Certainly no more than that. So when I say a department head presents their performance plan, that's what I intended to do, is strictly just if we want to aim for that 5-minute high level overview, perfect.
Mr. Warden, so then just to clarify, nobody's off the hook in preparing the same amount of information. My point is that the amount of information, all of those details will be provided as a standalone let's call it a report, like the performance plan. And we should each be able to understand those and then immediately get into a discussion. So that's why I don't think it needs more than 5 minutes, but I'm certainly expecting still fulsome reports. So 5 minutes would be great. Not 5 to 10, just 5, like just to get us thinking about a particular topic and where it would be nice to hear from each department, like where are you seeking council direction? Because a lot of the stuff is a bit base budget and it is a bit operational, and council doesn't have a lot of discretion over many items. So let's focus on where we can adjust things. Maybe it's about reducing FTEs, for example. Maybe it's about delivering a service in a different way. So I would like to, I think we're ready now to get to this stage and to this kind of budget deliberation. So my third point of 4 is that what I don't see is that in the past, almost no matter how clear the reports are, it seems to me we always have questions that cannot be answered during the committee meeting. And they tend to be answered in a follow-up reports after. So in this schedule, when would that happen? So for example, December 2nd, we have a capital expenditure meeting. A few items are surfaced. We don't have the answers. When is the committee going to be able to receive and finalize the debate?
We can certainly look at, normally what I've done in the past is from the first session, if there's questions that come out of that, then that's the first thing that we tackle in the second session. If there's questions that come out of the second session, then they're either answered when the fulsome plan comes to committee for discussion or to council for discussion, or we can certainly work in sort of a session that follows that prior to council's full consideration of things. in the past, when it comes to council for their ultimate consideration, and I certainly don't want to jinx the process, but it should be relatively straightforward. I know I just jinxed it, but with the discussion that happens leading up to that, it's really the culmination of those discussions that's in the final presentation. But we can certainly work in a session between sort of the second of the two major working days and the final presentation of things.
Okay, and it may be wise to maybe bookmark a date in advance, because I agree, so we could use part of the capital planning, but meeting to answer the questions from the first, but then we end up on January 13th where it says final council consideration. And so maybe wise to anticipate the need, and then if we don't need it, easier to cancel. So yeah, and then my fourth point I've already touched on, but it was the need to really focus on our discussions on where efficiencies have been attempted or gained or are anticipated, where some initiatives are will lead to maybe an enhanced service level, but enhanced doesn't always mean more money or more people. It could be that we're doing something differently. It will be nice to, I think that would address that concern that a lot of people have with that base budget, where it's almost like everything is status quo plus, and then so it's everything the same plus a bunch of new initiatives that are related to strategic priorities. But it would be nice to see not always an ask for additional FTEs, for example, but sometimes like, hey, we found a way to do this with 3 people instead of 5. But here are the implications. So I really, that would be my expectation, to have that consideration. Thank you.
Through you, Warden. Yes, absolutely. One thing that any member of the executive team will tell you is that you will never hear me say do more with less, because I don't believe it's possible. I will challenge them to work smarter. And that's what will be the underlying drive for a lot of what you see, is the challenge to work smarter. Whether that's leveraging technology different, whether that's better understanding our processes, which I think we do need to spend a fair bit of time doing next year. You will see some recommendations from me moving forward that I think we need to spend a fair bit of time actually understanding our key processes. When you speak about efficiencies, efficiencies are a funny thing, because if you don't know how well you do it now, how well do you know if you're going to become more efficient? You don't. And so by understanding our key processes much better than what we do now, then I think we can have a much more informed decision about efficiencies and where we can actually work smarter.
Okay, great discussion. Any other questions for Blaine? If not, I guess with regard to just earmarking another date just in case it's needed. Other than that, any concerns with the resolution? Councilor Sloan?
Through you, Warden, just as long as we can open some of those dates with respect to the 13th or the 27th as a possibility, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, if there's nothing further, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Motion carries. Other business? None. Correspondence? None. Closed session meeting items? None. Motion to rise and report? None. Date of next meeting, November 18th. Motion to adjourn.
Resolved that we do now adjourn at 1:10 PM to meet again on November 18th, 2025 at 9:00 AM.
Mover and seconder, please. Whitner and Ketchabah. All in favor? Motion carries. Thanks all.